If I were to ask you what you see over here in this image, what would you think? I mean, we know a lot of Bible stories, but if we were to look at it or just think about nowadays, both in ancient times and nowadays, that's the place to be, because that's in desertic places. That's where life is. That's where people go, and that's where they meet. That's where they chat. And in ancient times, that's where guys will go and meet women, their future bride. And we see that usually these places were outside the city, by the gate of the city. Usually the roads will be constructed or built by those roads. So people, when they will arrive, before arriving to a place, to a city, they will wash their things. They will give water to the animals. So it was a pretty common place to be at. And we see stories like Moses and Zipporah, or others. We see Jacob and Rachel. We also see Abraham sending his servant to look for a wife for Isaac. And that's what I want to start talking about. I want to talk about a particular case just for a moment. In Genesis chapter 24, you go with me to Genesis chapter 24. And here's the story in the context where Abraham is sending his servant to go to Mesopotamia to look for a wife for his son. And we start picking up in verse 11. So he goes, and he goes with a lot of camels. He goes with a caravan and with a lot of things, just being ready to look for a wife for Isaac. And in verse 11 he says, and he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. And he offers a prayer, and the prayer basically goes about, please, God, I want to find the appropriate girl for my master's son. And picking up in verse 14, this is what we say more specifically, what we see the prayer is about. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. That was to be the test. It was not only just that she will offer water, because that's probably what people were expected to do, but that will volunteer, take the extra step and offer water for the camels. And then we continue in verse 15. It says, but before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. So, which no doubt this would have taken some time. He was coming with a caravan. So the men gazed, in verse 21, the men gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. And this, of course, is what he had asked for. It seems that it's beating all the expectations, the wildest hopes. I mean, I come to this city and I just meet this woman that I just been asking this in prayer, and then it's like so easy. So, okay, this is really what is happening. So when the camels, verse 22, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms, weighing 10 gold shekels, and said, please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. Of course, this is the very church that, the whole reason why he had come to this place. The church had been to go back and to find Abraham's family, to find somebody from the branch of Nahor family, his brother, and lo and behold, this is what he encounters. So she added, we have plenty of both straw and fodder and room to spend the night. And then, of course, no doubt, we see over here that the man, let me see which one is the verse. Verse 26, the man bowed his head and worshiped the Lord. No doubt, this had worked out beyond of the wildest expectations that we will imagine for this man. So, there's another story of another man meeting a completely different woman. And that's what I want to focus for the rest of the lesson. In the Gospel of John, chapter 4, I started by looking at the case of Rebecca, and maybe we could look at the case of Rachel, or we could talk a little bit. We don't know much about the circumstances of her, and also of Moses and Sephora. But all of those are happy times, romantic times. Rebecca was beautiful. She was a virgin. Rachel, we're told that she was also beautiful, that she is fair of face and fair of form. And we're not told that Sephora was beautiful, but I will assume that she was beautiful at least to Moses. But this is a different story. There's no romance here at all. In the Gospel of John, chapter 4, starting in verse 4, it says that Jesus had to pass through Samaria. And interesting, the word that it says that had to pass, or in other version it says it was necessary. The King James Version says he must needs pass through Samaria. The truth is that most Jews were really it was not necessary for them to go through them, even though it was the easy path. But if it was something to be necessary for them, it was like they wanted to avoid that place. They wanted to go through the other side of the Jordan to circumvent going through Samaria and just going all the way to Galilee. And so we see that Jesus, however, says that it was necessary, that he needed to pass through there. And I'm not really sure what was the reason why he said that it was necessary for him to go there. But I really suspect that we do know the reason why he wanted to go there. And it is because he had to do something that was his very purpose of coming to earth. That he had a divine appointment with a woman in order to bring the gospel to the Samaritans. Seems to me that will be the more consistent thing with what the Lord will perceive as a necessity in this particular circumstance. So in verse 5, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sequir, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and interestingly, Jacob, who had met Rachel at the well, of course, this wasn't the well where he met her, but this was a well that he had dug when he had returned to Palestine after he had married Rachel and had 11 of his sons, of whom will be his eventual 12 sons. So he had come to this area and dug this particular well. So Jesus, worried as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour, and we're really not sure if he was talking about Roman hour or Jewish hour. We don't know exactly what time it was, but nevertheless, we know that all of a sudden, he meets a woman at the well too. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. And Jesus, as Abraham's servant had done, he says, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. And Rebecca, as you remember, as I just mentioned, had not only given a drink, but she had volunteered to bring water for the whole camel caravan. This woman's response was a little bit different. I suppose that she gave him a drink. It doesn't say. But with these words, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink since I am a Samaritan woman? And you see John's little note here. He says, for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. And they could have some financial dealings with them because it's indicated that the disciples went to buy food there. But they really did not have real dealings in any real and meaningful way. In fact, you remember some people, whenever they insulted Jesus, they will call him, hey, you're a Samaritan. That's how they saw Samaritans. And yet, Jesus asked her for a drink. And it's probably hard for us to appreciate the significance of the fact that he asked her for a drink. You know, surely anybody will ask for a drink. But here, we have that Jesus didn't have a bucket. So what would that mean? So that in order for him to drink, he will have to drink from the bucket of this Samaritan woman, which would have been something pretty offensive to Jews themselves. But I would like to think about this woman for a moment. And I think, what a difference whenever we think about Rebecca. You know, when we meet Rebecca back there in Genesis chapter 24, we see that she was beautiful. And apparently, a beauty that had just blossomed in that young woman. She was a virgin. And all of that beauty that is associated with her pure virginity of the younger. But this woman that Jesus meets at the well, maybe at one time, she had been beautiful. Maybe too beautiful for her own good. And I don't know, but whatever beauty she had, it had long gone faded. She's a woman that probably had a frown face, some wrinkles about her, around her eyes, the corners of her mouth, and many other places. She's a woman that in many ways was worn out with life. She's not a virgin. She is, as we learned, and we learn later, a woman who has already had 5 husbands, and the one that she was currently living with was not her husband. And if Rebecca is this sort of the ideal woman, the type of the woman that you might expect to meet at the well, she's probably everything of what you'd be afraid to meet at the well. And you see, for example, indeed in the Song of Solomon, the man describes the beautiful woman as a well of living water. And Rebecca was that. She was beautiful and full of life. She had a future ahead. But this woman is not. In fact, it's interesting that she comes to the well, and in this passage, there are 2 words that are in the Greek New Testament commonly used for well. Basically, the one word was one that indicated a cistern, a pit, someplace like that it meant stagnant water, probably a little bit fetid, smelly. And the other word that we found is one of a fountain. Of a fountain that means just fresh water. That fresh water that were flowing underground that probably you have tapped into. And of course, that would be the best type of water. And throughout this whole chapter, Jesus continues using the second word, the fountain. On the other hand, it seemed that there was an insistence, repeated choice on the woman on using the other word, the cistern, the pit, the stagnant water. And maybe that was manifesting her outlook in life. And there's also a difference, as Ime had just mentioned a moment ago, when Rebecca was asked for a drink, and she says, drink and your camels too. And when this woman is asked for a drink, you remember what she says more or less? What are you doing asking me for a drink? And when, of course, Abraham's servant inquires as to Rebecca, who is Rebecca? We know, and he asks who she is. And basically, she is telling her that she's got a name. She's Rebecca. We see on the other hand that this is a woman whose we don't know her name. And Rebecca says that she's the descendant of Nahor and that she belongs to our people. This woman, the Samaritan, is just the other. Completely different. And now you think about it for a minute. Maybe in talking about meeting the woman at the well, I think especially of men, but I'm sure girls will think to the well of what type of man am I meeting? What type of woman am I meeting? And then I ask a question, especially to the man, which of the two would you rather meet at the well? Rebecca or this nameless Samaritan woman? The pure young virgin who is ready to do anything to help? Or this worn out lady who just is asking, why are you bothering me? And Rebecca's story is just, it seems that it's too good to be true. Because I don't know, maybe it will be like, I don't know, most guys wouldn't admit, but you will think, or maybe when you were younger, or if you are like in college and all, like it's kind of like every man's fantasy, that you will think that, you know what, I'm driving, and then all of a sudden I see this beautiful lady that is working on her flat tire, and then I go and help her, and then all of a sudden, like, wow, like she falls in love with me, and then we just get married, and it's beautiful and everything. But I ask also a question. That woman that Jesus meets at the well, the Samaritan woman, where is she? She's everywhere. She's in every checkout line in a grocery store. She's the woman that you really literally meet at the laundromat, rather than the one that you are always expecting, the one that shows up at the movies. What type of woman is she? She doesn't have much hope left. You know, I was looking at some sayings, some sayings like I was hearing from a sports announcer that he was famous for making dumb statements. And one time he was talking about a baseball player, and he said something talking about him, about the baseball player, that his future was mostly ahead of him. And then you think about it, and I pick on that one line. And this lady's future was all behind her. What does that mean? And even if it doesn't make a lot of sense, what I'm saying, logically, I think we do in fact understand what that means. I suspect, as I mentioned earlier, that she was once beautiful. But she apparently made some bad choices and paid a very heavy price. And you know, we can speculate so much about who she was, and what happened in her life, how she had gotten in that situation. And if we were going to guess, I suppose that she was the type of woman that she was always attracted to the wrong type of guys. Or maybe, you know, it's got to be a good man, but like it's got to be the most handsome man. Or maybe not the most handsome man, but the richest man in town. And it might not be exactly that. Maybe she was one of those people that was just dependent or desperate. That she would marry anybody because if she didn't marry anybody, she couldn't carry on in life. She would be a cast off. Or maybe she had left one of them, or two, or three. We just don't know exactly what was about her life. Maybe all of her earlier husbands had died. We really don't know, but despite all of this, the best or the worst construct that we can put is that this wasn't an easy life. In any case, whether we see anything about this situation, is that this woman, that I'm sure was, at this moment, a shell of what she had once been. Here she is. She's working to survive, and it seems like day-to-day existence. It seems that she doesn't have any children. She's going there. Maybe she will be. She could have been at a point in her life that having 5 husbands, she would have had some young daughters to go and get the water. Or maybe she did have children. She's picking up the water to go and bring it to the young ones. I suspect also, it's kind of like, when we think about her, the way that she answers. Apparently she answers, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink since I am a Samaritan woman? And both the fact that she was a Samaritan woman and the fact that she was a Samaritan and a woman might suggest that, like she was saying, why are you even talking to me? I think she probably said that pretty sharply. Maybe sarcastically. I don't think that she's just asking kind of like, I'm curious, why are you talking to me? No, I think it was kind of like sharp tongue. It's kind of like, you're pretty high and mighty, you're holier than thou, and all of a sudden you don't have water, and now you get all nice to me. But I got the water. And I may be suspicious of men because I've had experiences with many men. And I know maybe some of the type of intentions that men may have. Probably especially it seems that she may not have been interested at religion either. All of a sudden comes this strange Jewish man that showed up. And I doubt that she was practicing religion, but we know that she knows some of the issues. When Jesus talks to her and she tells her about the 5 husbands and presently living with somebody else, and she says, I perceive that you are a prophet. And then she says, our fathers worship in this mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem, that's where you're supposed to worship. She kind of knows like some good questions. It's kind of like somebody that is not too involved in religion, but may ask, hey, are you the only ones that are going to go to heaven? Or why don't you use a piano? Or what about the thief on the cross? Kind of like using, that one argument without knowing much about religion in order to avoid something that she wanted to avoid, it seems. It seems that she's kind of like deviating the subject when he's talking about the husbands, because it seems that she cared. Contrast her with Nicodemus, that I was talking last Sunday about him. In the 3rd chapter of the Gospel of John tells us about this man, Nicodemus. I mean, he was everything what she was not. Here we see a Jewish man, devout. He knows everything. I mean, it's kind of like, if you were to go to another country and you meet an American, and you kind of like, know how to talk with an American in another country, because it happens the same if I were to meet a Colombian. But it's more than that. I mean, this guy knew the law. He was a devout man, and he just goes and seeks Jesus out. And then you put her by Nicodemus. And then you see that she's not a man. She's not Jewish. She doesn't come to seek Jesus out, but Jesus comes to seek her out. And in fact, he tells her something that she didn't reveal to Nicodemus, or that she didn't tell the disciples when she starts talking about the Messiah. And then Jesus said, I am he. The Messiah. He revealed that. This woman, I suggest is not somebody odd and different. This Samaritan woman is the world in need of salvation. She is a far better representative of the type of people that we need to think about whenever we take the gospel to. That we're ready to convert, the Nicodemoses of the world, or the Rebeccas of the world. But despite the somewhat unbalanced appearance, I always think about that. Rebecca, or the fact of meeting women at the well. And I think about even this congregation and many young guys. You guys down here, you got it great. You can meet the women at the church here, and you can come here and you got all of these ladies, but that's not the way most of the world is. This world is mostly full of Samaritan women. And I'm not talking about just women or gender in general, but Samaritan people everywhere. Not the Rebeccas, not the Nicodemus. And there are people in need of hope, in need of living water. What did she see in Jesus? The first thing that she sees in Jesus is that this was a Jew. And I'm sure she's assuming that all these Jewish people are condescending and they think they are better than us. And the next thing that she sees is that he's a man. And I think she's probably thinking about, usually what men want. And she probably expected much the same from Jesus. But she's surprised when she's asked for water. Maybe there's a little bit kind of like a bitter satisfaction, like you just despise all of us until right now, like you're thirsty and I got the bucket. So I can tell you this. But frankly, I think she probably thought at first that Jesus was some type of loony. Because, after he began talking to her about the living water, you look at the text here in John 4, and then Jesus asked her for water, and she responds in verse 9. How is it that you being and you ask me for a drink since I'm a Samaritan woman? And verse 10, Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he will have given you living water. And a lot of people probably assume that she didn't give him water. She probably did, I don't know. But she suddenly probably began to think, this is a different sort of man that had just told me, I don't know, I will be attracted to everything what he's saying. I don't think so. You read most of the commentaries that say that maybe she believed at this moment when Jesus told her that. But would you really think that she would think that being a worldly, wise, hardened woman, full of baggage and probably not so good experiences? I don't think a worldly, wise woman would think that. And she would have been softened quite that easily. And I suspect, in fact, that her response here is probably delivered in a sort of like a tart tone of voice. And when she says to him in verse 11, sir, you got nothing to draw and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? It's kind of like, I keep talking to you. Where are you going to get that living water? You don't have a bucket here. Verse 12. You're not greater than our father Jacob, are you? Who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle. Who do you think you are? But Jesus persists. And he said to her, everybody who drinks of this water here that you're drawing will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall come in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. Weighty words. If you believed that Jesus was the one that was talking to you. But I don't believe at this point. She's kind of reasoning to believe that she's talking to Jesus, the Son of God. Now, what do you think about somebody who says this type of thing? Maybe, are they crazy? What are they talking about? And when the woman says in verse 15, Sir, give me this water so I'll not be thirsty, and come all the way here to draw. Again, I kind of think that the tone of voice, I see that she's kind of like asking with that sort of sarcasm. I kind of suspect that she's saying, oh, I'd like to have some of that. Why don't you give me some of that? I'd like to not come back here again to pick some water. But with a pretty much sense of like, I know who this guy, I know who he is, what he's about. But then, Jesus shifts the subject entirely. My point is that I think probably she first thought this fellow man here talking to her, she doesn't even know who she is. We don't know if she at that point knew who Jesus was or if he was Jesus of Nazareth, if she's heard of him. This is Jesus. I don't know if she's thinking of that. But I will say that even in her so born out life, maybe she was wishing for that. Maybe she said, I wish that my life would have been different. And you know, whenever we see in this world, we see that people have no objective hope in this world. We have an objective hope, and it's not like we wish that we want to go to heaven, but we trust in the promises of the Lord, and we have a reason to have a hope. But there are many people in the world that don't have hope in the sense that we have. But everybody in this world has a subjective hope. I could wish for something better. Somehow things ought to be better than what they are. But then Jesus tells her, go and get your husband. And apparently an embarrassing moment, she does have a conscience of this. Did she care? She might say, what do you care? But apparently she did. You notice that the words start being less and less and less. And she says, I don't have a husband. She cared at least enough to evade the subject. And I mean, she doesn't exactly lie. She says, I don't have this husband. And Jesus says, that's right. You don't. As a matter of fact, you had 5 husbands. And the fellow you're living with now is not your husband. It sounds more like here, this fellow, that all of a sudden, she may have thought of him, of this man, this Jewish man, he's saying kind of like all kind of crazy things. All of a sudden, can you imagine what she must have felt when she heard, that's right, you have spoken the truth. Because, you know what? You have 5 husbands and the one that you're living. I mean, everything, I don't know how to say this in English, but like everything went, whew. And then I think, now she knows that this man knows everything about her life. And the world back then, it was not like tiny village, it was a tiny villages. There were no social media. There were no phones. Everybody lived like packed in a place. And when somebody came from another place, it's kind of like the way I will perceive Americans when they will visit Colombia when I was little, because at that time there were not many Americans that will go and visit. And when Americans came and visited, it was like, wow, man, like this kind of like an alien. It's like somebody from another world. I think it was something like that, like, okay, this man, completely different, is coming here and is telling me everything about my life. He knows everything. And I think at this point she is deeply transformed, but yet a little bit frustrated. She says, I perceive you're a prophet. But she didn't want to talk about her husband anymore. She wants to change the subject. And Jesus let her change the subject too. And I want to suggest that her perspective has changed over here at this moment. And it's not changed just because Jesus knows everything about it. Because to me, the great power of this incident and the power that Jesus has to get her attention and her heart is not that he said like that he knew everything about her. But the fact that even though he knows that everything about her, he still cares about her. Here there is this man, this Jewish man that knows everything about me, and he keeps talking to me. He doesn't care what I've done, and he keeps talking to me about this living water. And he knows everything about my life. And he continues talking about this. Because she suddenly realizes that this fellow who knew that she had 5 husbands was living with somebody else, was somebody completely different. He cares about me. And I don't think she was used to that. And much less from a Jew who knows everything about her. And this man who seemed to know who she really was and still care about her. But something she had never met before. And I wonder if perhaps that may not have been what prompted her. It could have been whenever he said, the hour is coming, and now is when true worshipers shall worship the Father and the Spirit in truth. Is the Messiah going to be the one that brings what she asked? But I think perhaps there was also a deeper inner response. I've never met a man like this before. Because she probably had met a lot of men at the well. She probably had men, all of them in her earlier years. They were looking for a woman like her. But she's never met a man like this. And she left her water jar. And she went running to town, telling everybody, this man knows everything that I have done in my life. Could this be the Christ? You know, I think that question was kind of like, it's a question that she's not too committed to that question, but it's kind of like in her mind, and it's kind of like embarrassed to say it, but she just goes out and tells her, you know, she went to that place with a jar, and then, she's leaving and she's going back without a jar. She's coming back over there with the living water for everybody. Abraham's servant saw Rebekah as meeting his needs and Isaac's needs. And Jesus saw the Samaritan woman and her needs. And I want to bring the lesson to a conclusion tonight. There's all kinds of things that we could talk about it, and I'm sure you've heard like so many lessons about the Samaritan woman. But it's always good to just keep talking about it. So much in it. And I want to bring the lesson to a conclusion talking about the implications on evangelism. The Nicodemoses of this world may seek us out. But we will have to seek out the woman at the well. But I want you to know her success. Nicodemus went back, and he couldn't even tell his friends or his co-workers at the Sanhedrin. He's kind of have to be quiet and all. You know, you see him later in John 7. He's kind of like for Jesus, but not really all open. And if he would have said it, they would have mocked him. But this woman goes out and tells everybody, and the whole town came to hear Jesus because they saw that something in her character had changed. And they wanted to come and find out what was it that was changing her. And when they came out, those are the very people. We all know the statement, what Jesus was talking. The fields are white into harvest. And when Jesus made that statement, he was talking to his disciples about all those people who come out to see you. And when she went back to town, I guess, I imagine it that when Jesus was saying all of this, like the fields, the harvest is ready, when he was saying that, I think the Samaritans were coming in, or somehow, they was coming, and then the disciples looking at all this scene. What is happening over here? Verse 30, they went out of the city and were coming to him. And in verse 35, do you not say, there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields. They are white for harvest. And I ask tonight, do you know a Samaritan woman? Ask her for a drink of water. And tell her about the story of the Samaritan woman. You know, in just a moment we're going to stand and sing our song of invitation. It may be that somebody realizes that they are in need of this fountain of living water that is needed. Maybe they identify with this woman in some way or another in need for that. With that can be truly the water of life. And if you're somebody who have wandered away and have realized that you need the prayers of people and forgiveness, we're here ready to pray with you. If you're subject to this invitation, we extend it now as we stand and sing.